We begin from scratch.
Can you hear me?
Mr. Bob Blackman, thank you for joining us here on India Today. As a Member of Parliament from the UK, what's your reaction to what's happening currently, the searches that are underway at the BBC offices here in India?
Well, as I understand it, the income tax authorities in India are doing basically a survey on the BBC offices. Obviously, if there's concern about any tax records, then it's up to them to investigate. The reality is that it's up to the BBC as an independent organisation to make sure that all their tax records are kept up to date. And obviously, if the tax authorities have got concerns, then it's right for them to investigate. I can't obviously comment on any allegations that are being made because at the moment there don't seem to be any. So we'll see what the outcome is. And I'm sure that the BBC will fully cooperate with the Indian authorities and that the matter will be resolved quickly.
I understand that you can offer only a limited view right now, Mr. Blackman, but let's say this exact circumstance was to play out in the United Kingdom and there was a media company where there were allegations of tax evasion, of tax irregularities. Would you then warrant this kind of action, sir, these kind of surveys?
Well, it does depend on the extent of any complaint that has been made. I mean, obviously, from the Inland Revenue in the United Kingdom does checks on companies at various different times because of the returns that they make to the Inland Revenue, and that's proper and right. And indeed, obviously, investigations are carried out.
Mr. Blackman, you know, there are a lot of questions right now about the BBC, about the Modi documentary that I'm sure you have your view on, and I'll get to that in just a bit, sir. But the concern right now about the BBC is their overseas funding. And there's a lot of talk of a Chinese hand in it, of Huawei, about which the UK also has taken action against. Is there such talk in the United Kingdom as well about the BBC's overseas funding?
Well, obviously, the BBC are a separate organisation, completely independent, a public service provider, and they broadcast the programmes that they choose to commission and obviously develop. Their news coverage is vitally important, and it's vitally important that continues to be both independent, but actually based on evidence and reporting the news, rather than necessarily casting aspersions against people without evidence. And so I think, you know, very importantly, we've obviously seen this docu-series of two programmes which, in my view, were a hatchet job on Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Indian government, and indeed the entire system in India of the judicial system here. So, you know, to me, that was a poorly researched and bad piece of journalism, which I've condemned, and many others from the United Kingdom have condemned. Others, of course, who don't necessarily have the background knowledge, will obviously look at what the BBC has broadcast and ask questions to say, well, is this true or not? But clearly, my concern in the way that was produced is it was produced by an external organisation overseen by the BBC, and they had obviously had an editor involved in it, and then broadcast on BBC Two, which is our second channel on the BBC, across the nation. And of course, people see that and they will think that these aspersions have grounds. Whereas, as we know from the Gujarat riots more than 20 years ago, the Indian Supreme Court looked at this in detail and fully exonerated Prime Minister, or then Chief Minister, Narendra Modi from any blame whatsoever. And I think that demonstrates the independence of the judiciary from politics. And unfortunately, the BBC sort of almost discounted that from what they were reporting. That, of course, gives rise for concern. And the second programme, I'm afraid, cast modern India in a very different light to reality. You know, India is a secular country where the rights of all minorities are protected, and so they should be, and that's exactly right. So unfortunately, the BBC got this wrong. I don't think they should have shown that particular those two programmes, and indeed they should be looking far more at what I would call proper news reporting of facts on the ground rather than what was essentially propaganda.